test, test. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Forum. It's so good to see all these faces. And a lot that I don't recognize, which is great because we have the Becoming class is here with us. Shout out to Dell Hokinson, who runs Becoming. How many of you are in the Becoming group? Can I see some hands? Wonderful. You became. And now you're becoming here with Forum. Well, get to know your Forum neighbors to your left and right. We're so glad to have you there, here. How awesome is Dell? Isn't she great with the Becoming group? My name is Rob Lund, and I run the Forum. And my team members are Meadow Robertson. Meadow, you want to wave your hand? And Wendy Demandante, which is Wendy here? There's Wendy. We love your comments and suggestions, so if you have any input for us, we'd love to hear about it. I'm going to put in a quick couple plugs for the next few forums. Next week, October 5th, is Lisa Mason. Is Lisa here? There's Lisa. She is going to be talking to us about a recent Tibet travel that she's had. So she's going to be giving our Chuck Benson a little run for his money, maybe. We'll enjoy that. On October 12th, we have Lindsay Sept, a financial advisor, and she is going to be speaking. She's giving a talk called Faith-Aligned Investing, an intro into ESG, environmental, social, and governance-based investing. So I'm looking forward to that as well. I know that for a lot of you, like myself, we're deeply concerned about the state of our nation and this administration's kind of assault on our immigrant community. And it's been, for me, probably the most traumatizing chapter, and this is not what I envisaged for my country. So I'm glad that all of you are here with me today to learn more from our wonderful speaker today is Stephanie Izaguirre. She's an immigration attorney who has worked in Colorado Springs for 15 years. She first became interested in immigration law in the early 2000s while working at the U.S. Consulate in Rio de Janeiro. After graduating the Denver School of Law, she's worked as an adjudications officer for the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in San Juan, Puerto Rico, before moving to Colorado and opening her own law firm. So, with all that, I'd like you to please welcome Stephanie Izaguirre.
Thank you very much. It is really nice to be here again. I think I was here about 18 months ago. A lot has changed. But it's really, really nice to be back here to see so many people that I know and also meet new people. You know, I don't have it in my official biography, but I always like to say that I think my very, very first introduction to immigrants, and some of you have heard me say this before, is my family hosted a Laotian refugee family when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And we were told that this family, mom, dad, 2 boys, that they'd been living in a refugee camp, I think. I was like 6. And that they weren't going to know how to use our toilets, our washing machine, our sink, that they'd never been exposed to anything like that before. And so I got out, I don't know if any of you guys remember Richard Scarry, but I got out my Richard Scarry books with all the names of everything, and I was all excited to teach these 2 little boys all the English they ever would need to know. And we did do that, and it was great. But it also turned out that their dad had been working in the Four Seasons Hotel. I'm looking at my mom because normally nobody else has more information about this story than me, but she does. And so it turns out that this dad had been working in this hotel and very much knew how to use a stove, a bathroom, a shower, a washing machine. And I always just like to mention that because that was my very, very first experience with meeting someone from a different culture someone who was in a family that was in a pretty difficult spot. And, you know, whoever told us they weren't going to know how to use the toilet was very well intentioned. They were trying to help, but they were wrong. And so there's a lot of things that we can learn about people from other cultures, other countries. I think we love them as we ought to when we don't make assumptions about who they are, where they're coming from, or why they're here. And I think, I don't quote a lot of Bible verses at people these days, but I think it's Malachi 3:5 that talks about welcoming the stranger, the widow, the orphan. And I have tried to use my law degree, the advantages that I've been given in life to do those things. And so, with that introduction, I'm going to talk to you guys about the state of immigration in this country, which is a super depressing topic, and also changes every day. I was at a conference. I also work with children in the child welfare system as an attorney for the children, or sometimes an attorney for the parents. And so I was in Aspen a week ago at a conference, and the woman doing the immigration talk in her slides was like, we're going to take a minute to breathe, to sort of center ourselves, because this is all really, really upsetting information. And so I just want to acknowledge that I would like to talk about hopeful things, but there's not a lot of hopeful things to talk about on this topic right now. The one kind of hopeful area that I am going to start with is during the first Trump administration, or maybe slightly before, several of our state legislators and immigration attorneys in Colorado got together and started looking at Colorado law and what we could do with Colorado law to help make life better for our immigrant neighbors. And so we do have several things in Colorado law that are designed to help. One, if you have a child who's been abused, abandoned, or neglected by their parents, it used to be that state law protected them and gave them options that made them eligible for immigration benefits up until the age of 18. Our legislature went ahead and changed that to 21, and so we are one of very few states that can provide those state court findings necessary to ask the immigration system to get green cards for abused, abandoned, or neglected children. You may have heard there was a recent report from USCIS saying, oh no, like most of these kids are over 18, which is a really dumb thing to say because the immigration law protects people up until 21. So it makes sense that people receiving benefits from this program called Special Immigrant Juvenile Status would be between the ages of 18 and 21. You are considered a child in immigration law up until 21. The other thing that the Colorado legislature has done is changed the sentencing requirements. See, this is like so in the weeds, but I'm really grasping for positive things to share with you guys. Has changed sentencing requirements for misdemeanors, because if you are convicted of a misdemeanor, or a crime actually, in the state, and the sentence is a year or more, that makes you subject to immigration sanctions that can be difficult to recover from. And so our legislature changed, I think, all misdemeanor sentencing. The maximum time you spend in jail is 364 days. So that's 1 day less, but it's a huge difference for non-citizens convicted of crimes. And then you may have heard, because it's been in the news more recently, we have several laws passed to protect personal information that the state collects, whether that's law enforcement, whether that's the court system, Medicaid. There's kind of a patchwork of protections in place so that essentially ICE can't go get your information from the Medicaid office or the driver's license office and use it for law enforcement. And I have heard some people say, well, why shouldn't they be able to do that? But the reality is, if people are afraid that their information is going to be entered in a system and used against them by ICE, then what that means is they don't go to the doctor, they don't get a driver's license, they don't show up to court. They are afraid to be involved with the state or the county on any level because they're afraid that information is going to be used against them. And so I do really applaud, it's not just marijuana that we're unique about in this state. We have a really, I would say, vibrant legislature that has really come up with, nobody's perfect, but they've come up with some really unique ways to make life better for our immigrant neighbors in this country. And so I really like that. So yay, Colorado. The federal government, on the other hand, is a whole other story. So I'm going to talk about what I guess I would consider to be some of the worst or most upsetting changes that have happened recently. And then I intentionally didn't prepare any slides because I feel like this is stuff that changes pretty much on a daily basis. But I would really like to, I'm hoping to use about half of the time that we have this morning to just answer questions. And so I really, really want for the next few minutes for you guys to be thinking about things that you potentially would like to ask me. And I'll tell you, when I was here a year and a half ago, somebody sitting sort of over here asked me about what does it mean to be undocumented, and kind of what term do I use to describe immigrants in our community. And it really, really stuck with me. It's something that I've talked about a lot because there's a lot of people who we call undocumented who actually are documented, or they're documented in one way or the other. And so my point is, I really appreciated all of your questions the last time I was here, so please be thinking of some. Okay, so, and again, some of these are sort of in the weeds, but I think they're all changes that are designed to make life really, really miserable for someone in the immigration system, because the government doesn't have the resources to round up and deport everyone. But if they can make people so miserable that they just leave by themselves, then they're kind of doing the government's job for them. And for the first time in my 15 years of practicing law here, I actually have clients saying, I think I'm just going to go back home. Like, maybe they're, in their 50s or 60s, their grandparents, like they don't really want to get detained or spend 10 years fighting a legal battle. So probably the first big change that you guys may have heard of was around something called expedited removal. And so removal is the legal word that we use for deportation. There's two kinds of deportations in our law. One is with a judge, kind of like a regular court hearing, where you have a chance to present evidence and apply for relief or benefits. It normally takes between 2 to 3 years maybe to kind of get carried out. And then there's something else called expedited removal, which is something that happens at the border, and it's designed for people who really don't have much of a right to be here. They haven't been here very long. They don't have many connections to the United States. And people who are given an expedited removal often don't even realize what's happened, because there's no judge, there's no court hearing. It's just like a piece of paper, and it says expedited removal, and it says you can't come back for 5 years, but they often don't really know what's happening. So in the past, we saved expedited removal. Our government had made the decision to save expedited removal primarily for people who had tried to come back in the U.S. with a criminal record, or maybe they'd used fraudulent documents trying to come in. And expedited removal could only be used with people who were within like 150 miles of the border and had been in the United States less than 2 years. And I was not a big fan of expedited removal ever, but you can kind of see that the point of it was a kind of quick deportation for somebody who didn't really have a lot of connection to the United States. And of course, asylum was always an option that people in the expedited removal process had, but generally, people who got an expedited removal were people who just hadn't been in the United States very long. But now, the government has expanded use of, they've taken away that 150 miles of the border requirement, and and then there was a Board of Immigration Appeals decision that gave immigration judges the authority to terminate regular immigration cases kind of against the will of the person who was in the process. So maybe I have a client who's asking, maybe they're married to a US citizen, or maybe they're eligible for something. And now the immigration judge can cancel the case. Now that sounds great. That sounds like a really good thing. But for people who've been in the United States less than 2 years, the government kind of said, okay, we're shrinking the regular deportation process, but now we're going to expand expedited removal, and we're going to have our ICE agents right outside the courtroom. So the judge is going to tell you, hey, we're dismissing your case. You walk out the door, an ICE agent grabs you, throws you on the floor, takes you to the detention center, and processes you for expedited removal, which you have almost no defense other than asylum. So that's one major change that has really impacted people that we might call recent arrivals, so people who've been in the United States less than 2 years. Then the next thing that happens, so you have somebody who, they had a sort of stable deportation process in which they had access to all of the rights that our Congress thought were appropriate. Now we've put them in this expedited removal process, which is pretty short on due process. And ICE is going to take them to the detention center. So normally, or in the past, I should say, the first thing that an immigration lawyer would do would be ask for a bond. And hey, this is somebody who probably they have no criminal history. I mean, if they had criminal history, they wouldn't have been eligible for this stuff over here. But probably it's someone who's been in the United States less than 2 years. They maybe don't have much of a defense other than asylum. And so maybe the plan would be, okay, I'm going to scrape together $5,000 for a bond or something like that, and then I'll get out, and then I'll be able to apply for asylum, because that's the only thing available with expedited removal. Well, now the government has said, oh no, if you entered the country without a visa, meaning even if you came and asked for asylum, but if you entered under what we call entry without inspection, now you're not eligible for a bond. So the judge can't even give you a bond if the judge wants to give you a bond. And so now you went from having 2 to 3 years to kind of like earn money, present your claim, hire a lawyer, to you are going to be detained in a pretty bad situation. You're going to be detained in this detention center while your case is going on. So how bad do you really want to go forward with your case? And they went from expanding the no bond thing to people who were subject to expedited removal less than 2 years to now anyone who's entered the country illegally at any point in time, even if they entered 20, 30, 40 years ago. So, for example, I recently had a client who was eligible for a green card. We'd been filing paperwork for him for a really long time. It was a pretty complicated case. He had been ordered, he's probably like 70. He'd been ordered deported in, I think, 1988, had come back, and under the law was eligible for a green card through his children. But, there's the administrative law that says he's eligible for a green card, and then there's also kind of like the deportation section of the law, which says that if you've ever been deported, you can be just picked up subject to reinstatement, they call it, and deported again. So after having spent $10,000, $15,000 on his green card application and fighting it for 4 or 5 years, you know, I sat down with him and his wife, and like I said, they're grandparents in their 70s, and I just said, look, I can't promise you that we're going to walk out of the immigration office. Like, you might walk out with a green card, or you might be detained and get thrown in the detention center. I can't tell you what to do. And it's that uncertainty or fear that makes it so hard for people in this kind of situation. I think if I had told him, oh, you will be detained, he probably would have said no problem. And if I had said, oh, I can promise you, you won't be detained, obviously that wouldn't have been a problem either. But it's that not knowing that really, really scares people and makes it hard for people to ask for things that they're legally entitled to. So now that we're currently living in this situation where anyone who entered the country illegally without a visa, anyone who entered without a visa is now subject to mandatory detention, meaning they can't get a bond. We have private prison companies all over the country investing in more detention space. We have ICE, I think intentionally, moving people, it can't make sense financially, but like moving people left and right so that when you go to do your client's hearing, they're not there, like they're not at the detention center anymore. We have judges. I have a client who is married to a U.S. citizen, entered the country with a visa, so he should be eligible for a bond. He has a DUI, and I don't want to minimize the consequences of a DUI, but he has complied with all of the requirements given to him by the state of Colorado to deal with the DUI, but they're not going to let him out because they say he's a danger to the community. And so in the 6 months that the case has been going on, his wife has lost her home, she's been evicted, she has a bunch of medical issues, he was the income, the breadwinner in the family. And so what they're trying to do is to make him give up, right? Like if he gives up and then maybe he comes back across the border, or maybe, you know, then they can really get him. But the point is, I think they just want him to give up. He has a legal right to have a green card. I'm pretty sure he's going to win his case. But he was given no bond as a way, I think, of sort of destroying his spirit, is kind of what is happening there. So there have been all kinds of other actions. Immigration law is federal. It's also administrative law, which means that there's a lot of what we do is based on regulations, and it's easier to change regulations because you don't need Congress. It's easier to change regulations. And I think the Trump administration learned during the first go-around that a lot of the stuff that they were doing didn't comply with kind of our legal process requirements to make changes to the law. And so they've gotten very good this time around at making little changes that just make people's lives more difficult. So, for example, I work with a lot of special immigrant juvenile kids who are here legally. They've been given, they generally have like approved immigration petitions. The Biden administration gave them deferred action, which was a status that allowed them to remain here and get work permits. Well, now the government has taken away that deferred action status. And so what that means is no work permits, and these youth, because like I said, they go up to 21, but these youth are here in this country sort of with a valid pending status designed to protect vulnerable children, and yet they can't work. And once they turn 18, if they run into ICE, they can be deported. So taking away that deferred action, it's like a small thing, but it really has made life more difficult for people. The other thing that is happening, and this is like so Kafkaesque, I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain it well, but if you're married to a U.S. citizen, and the only thing you quote unquote did wrong was enter this country without a visa, there's a process to get a green card. It takes about 6 years, and it requires you to have your ultimate interview back in your country. So the way it's gone since 2012 is we file all the paperwork, and then a couple days before the interview, the client leaves, they do a few things in their country, they have their interview, and they come back. Minimal disruption to families, minimal disruption to, family income, etc. So in that 6-year process, one of the requirements is a waiver, essentially to ask forgiveness for having come in illegally. And you can't get the waiver, you're not allowed to file the waiver if you're in the deportation process. So until recently, if I had a client who qualified for that waiver and who was in the deportation process, I would ask the judge to either completely terminate the removal proceedings. Hey, this person is doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're spending a bunch of money on a lawyer, they've filed all this paperwork so far, clearly their intention is to resolve this issue, there's no legal impediments other than your deportation process. Can you cancel it so we can continue to move down the road? Or, that was during the Biden administration. During the Obama administration, we weren't even allowed to actually close the case. We had to kind of like put the case on pause until the interview was scheduled, and then come back and say, hey, look, here's the interview date and everything. I promise you my client is going to this interview. And then they would close the case and allow the client to go to the interview. Well, the most recent information that we have is that anyone who we file this process for now who is out of status, and that's everyone, because if you weren't out of status, you probably wouldn't do this, but anyone who now asks to get their green card through this 6-year-long process, they're going to find them and put them in removal, which essentially makes it impossible, right? I can't get them to the end if they're in removal in the middle section of the case. And now what the government is saying is, if you file the petition to start this process, then in the year that the first step is pending before this waiver happens, we are going to put you in removal, thus making your client no longer eligible for a green card. And if they end up getting deported back to their country, it's a 5 to 10 year wait depending on how the deportation happens, but at a minimum, it's several years of separation from family, even in the best case scenario. And so we had people in our country that were qualified for a green card and were going to be on their way to get it, and now they can't ask for it. And it's such a long process and it's such an expensive process that I don't even ethically feel like I can ask people to sign up for it, because I'm putting them in a worse place than where they were at the beginning. So I think I've detailed for you guys how the deportation process has just gone to hell, so to speak. How the, or Hades, if we were listening to the scripture this morning. How special immigrant juvenile status, a status that we use to protect vulnerable immigrant children, is becoming less and less useful to those youth. How the consular processing avenue to get a green card for someone who just wants to continue their life with their family here and sort of like clean their record or like fix their problem, that's no longer an option. It's just gotten really, really hard, and there are very few. Like I said, I just think that the government, there's been so many videos of people being thrown on the ground or punched in the face or shoved into cars. And most people rightly are very scared of that. And so they don't, they don't want to kind of ask for anything, even if they're entitled to it, because they're afraid of what might happen to them or their family. And so it's been a pretty, when on election night, okay, so I'm getting to the part where I'm going to ask questions, so be thinking, or ask for your questions. So on election night, when I saw the little New York Times ticker thing ticking in like the Trump direction, and I just kind of sat there in my chair and I was just like feeling so sick to my stomach and like, how am I going to survive the next 4 years? And my the kind of the answer that I came up with is that I think, kind of like those Colorado legislators, the best thing that I can do is work to help protect my clients from ever coming to the attention of ICE to begin with. So I'm going to share a few things with you guys. You may know about this already. On Facebook, there's a group called the Colorado Rapid Response Network. What they do is they ask community members around Colorado who see law enforcement that may or may not be ICE to take videos or pictures, and then the Rapid Response Network sends trained confirmers out to the site to confirm whether or not it is ICE that's operating. I have learned a lot about ICE's methods, just looking at, because you see kind of over and over and over again the same vehicles, the same officers, kind of the same tactics. There are a few other community groups that have kind of similar functions. I think the Colorado Rapid Response Network is the one that does it the best, and it's statewide. I have stopped telling people what they should do as an attorney. Part of that is respecting their autonomy and recognizing that they know what is best for their own life. So I've started just explaining the law and the possible outcomes, and I've kind of stopped telling people this is what you need to do or what you should do. I've never been faced in my life with, for example, if I go get a driver's license, is that going to separate me from my family permanently? I think people who've never had that struggle, it's very easy to be upset about, like, oh, you're driving without a driver's license, or you're driving without insurance. And I'm not saying you should. I mean, that does violate the law, but I think I've worked to come to a place where I respect people's ability to decide for themselves what is best. And I've been working, thanks to the support of my parents, I've been working really hard at learning criminal law, which is not ever where I really thought that I myself would be as a criminal defense attorney, but we have so many immigrants in western Colorado and southern Colorado, but southwestern Colorado, where there aren't attorneys that speak their language. There aren't attorneys that understand how the immigration system works. There aren't attorneys that understand that, hey, this plea might be a good plea for a U.S. citizen, but it's not a good plea for a non-citizen. And so I've been working at being, I guess, culturally humble and understanding kind of my place in my clients' lives, but I've also been traveling all over the place, trying to provide, and so that's why I said I thank my parents, because they're helping out with my kids and stuff, but trying to provide as much legal support as possible in kind of smaller mountain communities in Colorado where there just aren't attorneys, or there aren't attorneys who are familiar with the client's language or culture. So those are kind of the steps that I've taken. We have, I think, probably 20, 25 minutes. I would love to answer questions if there's people who have questions.
I'm going to take the first question since I've got the microphone.
Sure.
Sorry. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming today. What is the status of the various due process cases in the Supreme Court?
Oh.
Is there outstanding cases?
Yes. So the main one that comes to mind is the Vasquez-Perdomo case, which the Supreme Court decided a couple weeks ago, in which they essentially said, oh, if you're Latino, speak Spanish, and look like you're at Home Depot or something, we can stop and detain you. I teach a class on immigration law at CSU Pueblo, and I had my students read that class last week, and we talked a lot about how how the Supreme Court's decision doesn't, it seems kind of disingenuous. Like, I am the daughter of a lawyer. I have listened to my dad talk about sort of like the sanctity of the Supreme Court my whole life, and kind of how these people are there to just make decisions based on the law, not on kind of political positions. But it is really, really hard to read that decision as anything other than an endorsement of racism. Sonia Sotomayor's dissent in that case was really powerful, but I don't think that decision is in line with kind of our basic due process rights, and it hurts me to have to say that, and it also makes me worried about our future. So, at some point, it won't be just people who look Latino and speak Spanish. Like, at some point, everybody else's due process rights will be impacted as well. It might be too late by then, I don't know. And I don't mean to be like overly dramatic, but I don't feel good about that decision. I don't think it's consistent with our laws or our values.
Okay, some of us work with Afghan women and men in the community. I think most of them already have SID status or something that keeps them safe, but I'm wondering if there's anybody, and this doesn't just apply to Afghans, it applies to people from Haiti or whatever, people with pending asylum claims that have not been decided yet. I'm a little bit worried about them. Is the government going to try to remove them?
Probably yes.
Yeah.
So the SIV status is something special and protected. Just think about this for a second. Asylum law requires that you file your asylum application within a year of arriving to the United States. If you file it at day 366, you've missed your chance. So you don't qualify if you don't file within a year. But you're eligible for expedited removal now up until the point that you've been in the country for 2 years. So there's this window. Let's say you wait until day 360 to file your asylum application. There's still this year-long window where your application has been filed, but you could be picked up and removed at any point with almost no rights to present your case. And I should say, the government is supposed to hear the asylum application, but they're looking for all kinds of ways to cancel applications or decide them more quickly.
Just to follow up on that, so I think the people we're talking about came in through humanitarian parole or temporary protected status. So I'm wondering, if that's going to affect anything.
So
these are statuses which the government gave people who they thought were coming from danger, but they hadn't filed for asylum or they didn't have refugee status.
Yes, and I should say the Biden administration gave them, humanitarian parole is like a sort of limited, you enter legally, it comes with some additional benefits, possibly, it puts you in a better place legally in some situations, but also it generally ends at a certain time, and you can apply to renew it, but when you apply to renew it, you're telling the government where you are, or you cannot renew it, and then if they encounter you, now you're out of status and they can just pick you up. If you have TPS, you're supposed to be protected, but there's been a ton of court cases trying to cancel TPS for various countries. And to be honest, I don't know that I can answer questions about who has TPS now and who doesn't, because it's something that just changes every week.
Talk to us about birthright citizenship. Specifically, is the United States unique in having it? Why should we have it? And how likely is the Supreme Court to accede to the administration's wishes to cancel it?
Before 6 months ago, I would have said that will never happen. Now, I don't know. It's difficult for me to imagine it canceling, doing away with birthright citizenship. There are so many voting members of the country that are the children of immigrants. It's just difficult for me to imagine that happening politically, but I'm not going to say it could never happen. One of the things we actually talk about in my immigration class is kind of different countries' immigrant, sort of like their philosophies on immigration. So there are plenty of countries that have birthright citizenship like we do. We have a very family reunification-oriented immigration system. Canada, for example, their system, I understand, is based on kind of points, and if you have enough points, you can come in. They don't really let like entire families, extended families, come the way we do. We also talk about countries like Japan, which historically have not let people who are not ethnically Japanese immigrate to their country, but now they're actually being kind of forced to because their population is aging and they don't have enough workers. And then we also talk about models kind of more like Saudi Arabia, where they bring in tons and tons of third country nationals to work, but those people are given no rights at all in those countries and have to return home. So, I mean, I don't think birthright citizenship is unique to the United States. There certainly are other countries that do it differently. I feel like birthright citizenship, though, is so fundamental to like what we all learned about our country and who we were in social studies when we were like in 4th grade, and so it's just really difficult for me to imagine that that enough people in the country thinking that birthright citizenship is a bad idea. But like I said, I've given up trying to guess what is or isn't going to happen. So
we have a question over here.
Good morning. I was wondering, say for instance, if someone has a green card, however their ex-spouse throws it away, and then that person gets, how would you say, detained by ICE.
Mm-hmm.
Would that person be able to prove that they have a green card, or will they be deported back to their country?
So one of the great things about green card status or lawful permanent resident status is that it's really all about the person and not so much about the card. So if you don't have the card, you're still a lawful permanent resident. And eventually, at some point, the person's going to get either fingerprinted, or if they're detained by ICE, there's going to be some kind of name check, and ICE should realize at that point that the person is a lawful permanent resident. And lawful permanent residents are generally only allowed to be detained if they have particular types of criminal convictions. And so it seems very unlikely to me that someone would be maybe like accidentally deported because they don't have their card. So what they ought to do is they ought to make sure that their deportation officer knows that they're a lawful permanent resident and, connects them up with that record in the system.
I think we all agree the immigration system's a mess. What can we collectively, people, regular, just normal people, do about it?
Yeah, so Rob wants me to repeat the question. So the question is essentially what can kind of regular, normal, average people do to help? Well, I know this church has done a ton of work with immigrants. We don't have the ability to change federal laws other than with our votes. But one of the things that I really love about like this church and other groups that I've worked with is there are so many things that you can do to just help make the life of the immigrants in our community easier. Things like helping them understand transportation, helping them understand like how to get documents for their children or how to register their children in school. I think you guys work with the accompaniment group, or at least know who they are, but I can't remember it's ASC, Accompaniment and Sanctuary Coalition. Okay. the kind of magic behind the idea of accompaniment is that what most of us really want to do is get to know people from other places and kind of help them see, like, hey, we're not all like those people. Like, we're very happy to have you here. And I think there's a huge place for people who do that, and you don't have to speak Spanish. My mom uses Google Translate on her phone all the time to speak with our Venezuelan friends. And it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And so I would just encourage you to reach out to either the ASC or others in the community who are working with immigrants, because I think a friendly face and someone who just says, oh, I know how to do this. Like, I know how to get a driver's license. I know how to, find the building where your kid's birth certificate is or whatever. I think that's a huge help.
Our church in the last decade has sponsored 3 families from Afghanistan who came under humanitarian parole and temporary protected status, and it's my understanding that those have all been revoked. That status, is that correct? And could you update us about the legality of their status?
So, without knowing a little bit more about their specific situation, I would hesitate to answer the question. But TPS, temporary protected status, is something that the government authorizes for a limited period of time. And until recently, that limited authorization was almost always extended, almost automatically. And so, yes, some TPS reauthorizations have either been canceled or haven't happened. There's a ton of legislation in the courts, and they keep kind of going back and forth, so I wouldn't even know where that's at. Someone before mentioned SIV, so that's Special Immigrant Visa. Those people are probably the most protected because that is an actual visa category that generally allows you to work your way to a green card. And then humanitarian parole is actually probably the weakest of the 3 things I just discussed, because humanitarian parole lets you come in the country for a specific period of time, but you have less rights than people with TPS, and it automatically expires versus like TPS being renewed every period of time. So I don't know if that helps, but it's not automatic anymore the way it used to be.
I know we're coming to the end of this, but I just want to thank you so much for your expertise, and I'm interested in knowing about your class that you're giving. Do you find students, how many students do you have, and are they interested in going into the same kind of work that you are?
So CSU Pueblo has an undergrad legal studies program and political science program. There's only like 11 kids in the class, but they're really engaged. I really enjoy, I think some of them want to be immigration lawyers eventually. Many of them have immigration experience. Either they themselves or their parents or their families have been part of the immigration system. And so it's a really interesting experience talking to people who've lived what I'm supposedly the expert on. So it's a great class, though. I really like it.
Hi, thank you. Starting with hope, I'm sure we'll end with hope. We got to keep that going. You mentioned that question from last time of someone and languaging. I think our words are powerful. I've heard you say, our immigrant neighbors. Would you give us the language that you love to use?
That is such an... I just try... Well, I think the reality is that we as a country cannot accept every single person at the border that wants to come live here. And I always kind of try to start from that place. I don't believe in like 100% open borders. I just don't think that's sustainable. But I see a huge difference in my work between community members, people who've lived here for a really long time, or people who are integrated into our community. And I think that I feel like I have kind of an extra ability. I meet people all the time, and I'm in my office, and I'm always kind of trying to assess where they're at in this process and what they can or can't access. And I think that if you meet someone from another country, you have no idea what it took for them to be here. You have no idea what they went through. There's a little second grader, maybe third grader, second grader that I know that walked here from Venezuela with his mom. And I'm sure that none of the other little second graders in his class have ever experienced anything like that. And probably he's not going to talk about it either. But I just try, like, he's now part of our community. And his experiences, if he gets to stay here long enough, his life experience will make us a better place and will make this country richer, more human, more understanding. He has a lot to contribute to who we are. And so, yes, I try to talk about kind of our community members, our immigrant neighbors, because they're not wearing a sign that says, I'm an undocumented immigrant. Like, you don't know that about them. And they're going to work and contribute and be part of our community. And that is not the most interesting or the most important thing about them, right? Like, there's all these other things that define who they are. So I don't know if I have a good word, but that's kind of the attitude that I use to approach the people I work with. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm following up, I think, with Connie's question. Our church has sponsored an Afghan family with 4 adults, 11 children.
Wow.
And I think we're wanting some reassurance they're going to be okay. I know Dell and I went with them up to Aurora in February to finish all the paperwork and submit everything for their green card. They were working with a lawyer through Catholic Charities.
Mm-hmm.
So they haven't received their green card yet unless someone got notification. I haven't heard yet from Latifah that they did. So I guess we're saying this far along in the process, they'll be pretty safe.
If a lawyer filed green card applications for them, I would think they're pretty safe. That sounds to me like about as safe as you can be without being a citizen.
So Stephanie, I just want to thank you so much on behalf of First Congregational, but also for the Becoming people. We're in the midst of a series of 8 sessions that we're doing as part of the Sunday morning adult class called Becoming. And we have many of those people here today as well. I also just want to endorse Mary Jane's questions like, well, what can we do? And that's kind of what we're trying to do in this Becoming class, about local and not trying to worry about the huge issues that you are dealing with. But if anybody here wants to continue, I know Connie Kreider down here has the Sanctuary Company Coalition person coming in next week as part of our Becoming series. I know we have Deborah Thornton and Jennifer Costa here who will be coming in and talking down the road as well. The Afghan Creative Exchange Program I've been working with. So there is a lot of ways that you can get engaged, find out more, work out what to do, because I know it's a very emotional thing, and I think you started with hope. And I know that these people that I've been meeting are dealing with hope. So thank you so much for coming in. And I met you years ago when you were working with the Unitarian Church with the Sanctuary Program. So you have been engaged with this work for so long and so appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Give us hope.
Thank you, Del.
Thank you. We'll see you next week in the chapel.